Hey everyone, thanks for watching or listening in on our chat today with David Kraft. I'm Tyler Blackwell. I'm a medical physicist with Radformation, and I'm sitting virtually next to my coworker Troy Long, who's an operations research specialist and self-proclaimed optimization junkie. And today we're chatting with none other than David Kraft. I'm not sure we were ever formally introduced, but just a few weeks back we found ourselves enjoying the freshly powdered slopes of Breckenridge. We even shared a chairlift, I think, up or two up the mountain.
Feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, David's an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and MGH, where he works with mathematical modeling, machine learning, etc. But he's also a naturalist, hosting foraging expeditions in and around Boston. And he's a fantastic musician, according to what I've heard and seen. So, David, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that I feel like comes up a lot whenever having operations research people talk with an audience of clinicians is, what is operations research? And I was wondering what would be your canned response, because I think I've heard you say like math for the real world.
Yeah, that
before.
is definitely my canned response, because it depends on who asks the question. Sometimes I say applied math, and that sort of does the trick a lot of times, unless the person's actually in applied math or they know physics, because to a physicist or to an applied mathematician, if you say you do applied math, they're going to say, that's not the math applied to the real world necessarily. It's math applied to, dynamical systems or physics systems. Mm-hmm. So I say math for the real world, and then I usually go for a pizza delivery or post office delivery or some kind of routing problem where you're trying to optimize resources and do it the best way. And actually, I mean, IMRT is a pretty good example that you can give somebody if they have more than 3 minutes,
Yeah. I think I usually go in with the IMRT and then talk about how value at risk and DVH are the same thing, and try to say we do like a generalized problem solving, but with math.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, how do you even find out about operations research? Because it looks like you did engineering in undergrad. So how does that path head to operations research?
Yeah. I mean, when I was applying to graduate schools, it was kind of like I was applying in either applied math or statistics. And then I at that point, I just sort of learned about operations research. I think operations research, at least when I was really firmly involved in it, because I was in the program at MIT, it has this identity kind of crisis all the time. It's always like, who's heard of us? What are we? Who are we? What do we do? Always, it seems like so maybe the label. And for a while there was this effort to rebrand it. This was a long time ago, and they wanted to go with the science of better. I don't know. Do you remember that, Troy? The science of better?
No. So for me, it was always like industrial engineering, and with like a focus in OR.
But yeah, it's got a very euphemistic tone.
Yeah, I mean, calling it the science of better was kind of an interesting attempt, but apparently it didn't stick because nobody knows that anymore. But yeah, I just found it by Googling around and saying, oh, this is a very interesting. This is exactly what I want, is to be able to learn mathematical skills like optimization and probability modeling and whatnot that can be applied to real world decision making. I was also interested at the time in public policy as a potential. So those are kind of the programs that I applied to. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's and the MIT's operations research group is kind of a collaboration between multiple departments, from what I remember, that it's kind of its own little.
Exactly. It has a lot of the Sloan, the business school. It has a fair amount of the EE, electrical engineering, and some math, and some other hodgepodge people in there. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that the work in operations research has kind of taken you to a number of different interesting places. But recently, what have you been working on? The past few weeks. Do you have what's open on your internet browser window? That's fun. Not to probe too deep.
It's funny you ask me that right now as I look over to my other computer over there. I think, as you know, I've drifted a little bit away from sort of typical radiation stuff. But I am working on a problem with Thomas Bortfeld, my boss, who's actually growing a beard also, which is crazy. If you've ever seen Thomas Bortfeld, you've never seen him with a beard. So I just had a chat with him before I was chatting with you guys, and there his beard was. Anyhow, we're working on this somewhat theoretical tumor control probability computation idea, and the idea is that what happens if you are uncertain if a voxel is tumorous or not. So you have a probability superimposed on top of that voxel, and then that's going to factor into your TCP calculation. So you sort of have like probability of, first of all, there's probability of being tumorous, and then there's a probability that if it is tumorous, you actually cure it with a dose, and that's where the sigmoid function comes in. But then an interesting, and again, somewhat theoretical, because actually getting data on this is very difficult. But the math, forgetting that for a second, the math is interesting enough, and we're exploring this a little bit. If the probability distribution on the voxels is either one of an independence, each voxel is independent or dependent, and it's probably more likely that they're dependent. If there's tumor in one voxel, there's a large likelihood there's going to be tumor in another. And you try to write down a TCP calculation for that situation and then try to optimize it. It's pretty ugly. But we did a little bit of work with like 3 voxel examples, and then we just had a conversation, and we should probably do this for a little bit more than 3 voxels.
Yeah.
So I have been a little bit out of the loop with actually doing IMRT type calculations. So I literally just downloaded onto my new machine MatRad, because I don't want to fire up my old stuff. Well, I was going to say Sir, but I don't want to offend it. I love Sir. And I love Joe Deasy, and I love everybody who, I still like it, but I felt like I should like modernize a little bit. So.
Yeah, this is Mark Bangert's
yeah, exactly.
one, yeah.
Yep. So actually, did you overlap with Mark at MGH? I mean, he was.
I didn't overlap with him, but I had met up with him in Germany and in London and sometimes in the United States for just talking about optimization stuff, because some of his students would be in some of the ones, and we were also working on similar problems because we were doing like beam orientation stuff. Yep. And having some similar, not necessarily similar approaches, but similar policy thoughts about what the solutions would look like.
Got it. Yep. So anyhow, so that's one problem that I've been working on a little bit. Probably the bigger thrust in my research right now. I have 4 or 5 things I'm working on, but the one that's kind of nearest and dear to my heart, although it's very difficult. So sometimes I feel like I'm barking up the wrong tree and I should run away and do something else. It is try to understand the sort of the genomics of something like radiation sensitivity or drug sensitivity. Like, why are some cells or some tumors resistant to radiation and other cells or tumors melt very easily with a relatively low dose?
Is that the Dr. S kind of stuff that you've been working on that you presented at WIMP?
Yeah, exactly. That's the Dr. S stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really interesting to kind of get a grasp on it. There's so many, I mean, you know this, there's so many different data points to collect and sort through. The challenge though.
And
I mean, what I'm starting to realize, and it's taken me a couple of years to really realize this in a really thorough way, is that, it sounds so trivial and obvious when I say it now, but I'm going to say it anyhow, is that biology is very, very complicated. Like, simply the simple question of what happens to ask a radiation biologist this question. It'd be interesting. What happens to a cell when you irradiate it? I mean, the number of things that unfold, the number of processes that unfold to dictate the fate of that cell, what will happen to that cell, is it's very hard. It's just, we can't see this stuff. So we have to. So
right.
We, being biologists over the last 50 years, have developed all sorts of crazy assays to try to basically decipher what's going on. And amazing work has been done in that, and we know a lot. But for all we know, there's a heck more we don't know, and so we can't really make the prediction. I was sort of like naively going into it a couple of years ago. Well, good machine learning, give me the data, we'll figure it out. But if you look closely at the Dr. S paper, you see that we take a good stab at it, but we don't get very great results. You know, the R squared values are pretty small. So, but anyhow, it's still fascinating, and I do think it's the way of the. I mean, I think in the future, when we treat patients, it's going to be the case. I don't know when this future is. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 30 years. Maybe we get lucky and it's 5 years. But we take some genomic understanding of the details of their situation, and we use that information to prescribe either certain levels of radiation or certain fractionations of radiation and or certain drugs to go with it.
Yeah, so maybe we don't have an individualized profile that's 100% accurate, but maybe that data, interpreted in a meaningful way can give a push in a certain direction.
Yeah, you might even think about it as like pre-treatment adaptation, because there's often, you start treatment, you can observe and have some type of realized uncertainty, and then you adapt the treatment. But if you can move that observed uncertainty all the way to the beginning of treatment, then you're not going to have to expend those extra resources to have to adapt, that you can kind of start on the right track from the beginning, right?
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, I like that way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah, those are a couple things I've been up to.
Sounds like you've got a lot going on, David. So, a lot of really interesting things. Do you have, how many people do you work with or collaborate with, or are all these people at MGH, or how's this organized?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't have a very big group that I kind of pay for right now, because for better or worse, I'm not the best grant writer there is out there. But I often find people to collaborate because they have they have an interest in what I'm working on, or vice versa. So I'm working with some people at the Broad in Cambridge. Those are some people from a more genomics and genetics standpoint. And I have a couple collaborators over in Europe and in the Netherlands. I have a couple people over there, and a couple people at MGH. So yeah, it's good enough to keep me going.
I remember whenever I was in academia that one of the big draws of having an operations research specialist who had some domain knowledge was that you can actually like consult in on other projects and kind of like help along the problem solving process for coming up with a solution that is like reasonable, I would guess. Mm-hmm. And do you spend a lot of your time, or some non-insignificant portion of your time, doing that?
A little bit. I mean, it's obviously more so when you're actually at the office with people.
Yeah.
And you overhear somebody talking about random forest. I mean, nowadays, more of the consulting for me is actually on sort of machine learning stuff.
Yeah.
Operations research, I guess. I don't know about the curriculum nowadays, but at least when I was there, machine learning was not a big part of it. And it's kind of interesting too. I remember hearing about neural networks back in the day, like around circa 2003, 2004. And it was kind of like considered this like kind of sloppy, non-convex, people didn't really respect it very much, at least in my, whereas, for example, support vector machines, which had very nice theory behind them and, really nice theory, and were convex and whatnot. I mean, those were in their heyday, Mm-hmm. Now, obviously neural networks are now experiencing a very big heyday right now, even though mathematically one still has the same, feeling about them, which is to say that they're kind of big messes, but they work,
Yeah.
But anyhow, like the things you learn in operations research, they translate pretty well. I mean, optimization is the heart of all these things anyhow. So, but one thing that wasn't at the heart of all these things is like, sort of data science, the data splitting and, doing that well and thinking carefully about that. That was something I had to sort of teach myself in the last few years to get a better grip on that.
And kind of integrating the knowledge of the domain that you're working within kind of into some of these models, or into the preparation of the data, Because I feel like there was a period of time where a lot of papers that got sent out to be reviewed were my first machine learning model that somebody had gotten a script off of like GitHub or something like that, threw some data in there and then pumped it out. And now it seems like people are taking a lot of the front end prep and development of how they're going to use sort of the known characteristics of the data in the process to train these types of models.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we're in a very much like a kind of a strange time in the development of this stuff, because it's going to become more of the norm for data science. I mean, it already is kind of the norm, but all the tools are kind of still all over the place. So kind of everyone people are reinventing the wheel every day with millions of lines of code every day, reinventing the wheel. It'll be interesting to see how it settles out and what becomes a sort of like protocol software approaches we use for this stuff, because everything is in such flux. I mean, if you fall asleep for 6 months, it seems like you're totally behind.
Well, I can definitely respect that viewpoint. You know, I was a clinical physicist for about a decade before joining Radformation, and you know, just not long ago did we in sort of like the clinical realm learn about the impacts of machine learning, and you see it more at the society meetings and you know, APM annual meetings. But so for clinicians that, you know, maybe don't have access to a lot of resources, you know, what do clinicians need to know, or, you know, how would you explain machine learning? And this is sort of a basic question, but for, you know, for people that don't have the higher learning on this, you know, what do we need to know, or how can this impact us?
I mean, I think that I really think it from a point of view of a clinician, I think the clinician needs to provide this sort of statement of, this is what I want, or this is what we need. And then it's kind of, it should actually be kind of a show me the money type of thing. Like, I don't care about all these graphs and whistles and bells and other things. Like, if you can provide me a solution that does this, like the physician says, you know, just to use a very concrete, specific example that everyone will understand. Like, I would like to not have to draw these contours anymore.
Right.
Just, you know, you can talk about UNets all day, and you can talk about your loss functions, and you can do all this, but show me the thing that actually draws my contours and I like them, and then we're done. Right. You know, I mean, that's sort of like, I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
no, that's an interesting perspective, actually, because, you know, I was thinking more in terms of, you know, medical physicists have a certain training and education in, you know, the science of radiation and how it impacts, you know, cancer. And so I guess I was sort of wondering, you know, what more we need in terms of education or whatever to fill the gap. But what you're sort of suggesting is, you know, as a clinician, do your clinic stuff. You tell us what you need, and then you know, data scientists, people that are experts in machine learning, can do algorithms to employ their skills to sort of like culture that.
I mean, I do feel like, and I fall into this trap too. I think we all do, is that we fall into the trap of like an idea. Let's hammer it out. Let's get a paper out. But I think it would be very helpful if we all were really focused on solving particular concrete problems, you know, and that way we're not just sort of spinning our wheels and writing derivative papers and whatnot. And then, I mean, that's easier said than done, but to always have in mind the final product. So for me, like, the final product that guides me in the main project that's near and dear to my heart is a patient walks into a clinic with, you know, gets diagnosed and gets prescribed a course of action that really makes sense for that patient. You know, so it's very like, you know, which is fairly clear. And one of the reasons I came to this was something I was talking to a friend many years ago now, probably like 5 years ago. She was at Amazon at the time. She may still be at Amazon. And she always said, like, when they have a project at Amazon, if this is where you're at now and you're trying to get over here, you know, 5 feet to the right, instead of taking the next step over, think about like, kind of like, how do I get one step? I know not everyone's watching this, but how do I get like one step, the n minus one step? How do I get there?
Right.
Like, instead of like taking one little step forward from where you are, be like, I need to get to that goal. Like,
Yeah. How can
really
you just jump over there?
But
yeah, really just think about how to get to that goal.
I think in collaborative research in clinics, especially, well, this definitely came up a lot in my past, where I would be kind of the optimization, solve a problem type of guy, but a lot of times it wasn't the problem that I needed to solve that was presented to me. It was, how do I get to the solution they had in mind, or the solution methodology. So if it was to if the idea was to reduce the downtime of machines in the clinic, if that was the actual problem, what they would ask for would be something like, oh, we need to figure out how to insert a patient into the schedule whenever somebody cancels.
Right.
Which is a very different problem than the one that we actually need to be looking at. And that's also a very like consulting thing, where you try to get people to talk together and actually arrive on a single single end goal. Because a lot of it comes down to this like communication along the pipeline of what's actually happening here.
Yeah, I mean, I just today we had a presentation at work, and somebody was presenting their stuff on auto contouring GTVs using, and comparing the extra benefit of having PET. If you're going to do that, like, does it decrease the variability of the auto-generated contours and whatnot? And one of the physicians pipes up and says, well, in reality, we're not using CTs there. We would be using contrast-enhanced CTs. And so to me, that was kind of like throwing the whole thing up. Like,
Right.
if you're not really connected to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, then it's all good and well, and you did some nice plots, but and I don't think it was that bad. I'm sort of giving it an extreme. Stay connected.
Right. You just have to kind of go back to the drawing board and redesign that one.
Yeah, exactly. So just keep in mind and be very in touch with the people who are going to be using whatever solution you're going to be providing, and make sure you're on the right page.
You might have actually been in this presentation. This was in AAPM 2019, where a physicist from a single physicist clinic had come up and asked a question at the end of one of the knowledge-based planning sessions, and had essentially said, like, I don't have the time or the knowledge or the data to implement any of these things. What does this mean for us in this section? Like, we're not a big academic institute with access to students to clean data and all of that kind of stuff. So can you talk some about how far off you think we are from impact at those types of clinics?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting because on the one hand, I don't think we're that far off at all, except to say that people are very risk averse, and there are solutions out there for auto contouring, auto planning, knowledge-based planning, machine learning-based planning. And to my eye, and to an eye that's not looking at the subtleties of the DVH and the subtleties of the dose distribution that people in particular clinics get very excited about and very crazy about, in my opinion. To my eye, those solutions, it's like, looks good, send them off, go do it. But I see so many people say, well, they have an auto planning solution, even in my own group and in Greater Boston hospitals that I talk to people. Well, there's this auto planning solution, but it doesn't measure up to the sort of specs that we want. And, but I think if you were to actually compare those different plans, and if you could, for example, run a clinical trial of A versus B, which you're never going to be able to do, but you would not find any difference between, So I think the technology is actually ready, but I think people are very nervous about adopting it because they don't want to do anything wrong, right? This is the way we always done it, and we do it this way, and so nobody wants to standardize across the field. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It's a bit of an overstatement. There are efforts to standardize, but as we all know, especially those of us who work at academic hospitals, Dr. X and Dr. Y who work in the same service, you can tell their plans apart. Oh, that's a Dr. X plan. That's a Dr. Y plan. And if we can't even agree in one hospital how to treat glioblastoma, how the heck are we going to, you know, across the world or the nation or the city or whatever, you know?
I like to describe what. So for people who are not who are clinicians who are wondering what do I do at this company, the other kind of response that I'll give is quantifying ego into an auto planner. That we get, the main thing that I've worked on in the first few years here is EasyFluence, which is like a field and field planner, and people have a lot of very strong opinions on how 3D plans should look, and we kind of try to introduce some new ideas because most people will plan field and field as parallel posed because your brain can process that. But if you do a bunch of non-coplanar beams, if you have like 7 beams, people are not going to do a field and field plan manually. They just won't do one. You probably do IRT or something like that. But yeah, so putting something new in front of people to then have them compare it to something that they're not used to doing, and then have very strong opinions on how it should look, and how do we build that in without making it complicated? Because the more knobs and buttons you push with people who are not necessarily informed about how the underlying algorithm works, they're going to rub it one way and think it's going to go this way, but it might go this way. And I see that whenever I've observed people using something like a normal clinical TPS, is people have kind of a similar endpoint and they all rub it in different ways to get there through different pathways.
So exactly. So I mean, in a sense, the challenges, I guess, they seem more cultural than technological, and that's difficult because I wasn't trained on how to deal with those problems.
David, do you think that there's this has also something to do with just the paradigm of radiation oncology as it is today, where, like you say, there's kind of a culture, there's a way that we've always done it type attitude toward it? I mean, a lot of the machine learning solution or automated tools can actually really save people time and decision-making fatigue. So I mean, from our perspective, we see that as something that's kind of a no-brainer. But is this something that just requires a shift of ideology for us?
I don't know how it happens. I mean, one of the problems with radiation over the years is that it was kind of somewhat incremental changes. So why do we fractionate at 2 gray? Pretty much most patients get 2 gray a day. Why not 3 gray? Well, because you go back and 2 gray was deemed, a tolerable dose in 2D planning back in the 1960s. And okay. And now we have ourselves, how many years later? I don't know. I can't do the math. 60 years later. And we still, like, again, it goes back to the risk averse thing. And it also goes back to, well, if you're going to go to 3 gray, you got to prove that that's okay. Okay, well, that's going to cost a lot of resources and money and time to prove that, even though I think most people would say, yeah, it's probably fine but people talk about hypofractionation, more drastic changes, but you could save a lot of money and treat people a lot more efficiently if you could just go to 3 gray a day. And, we might be able to do that in a lot of different sites, or 4 gray, but none of these things get really talked about that much because it's just so hard to make these changes. So I don't know if I answered your question.
I mean, in a lot of ways, yeah. I think it's broadly inconclusive, but that we're sort of steeped in sort of tradition, and we have this sort of evidence-based, appropriately evidence-based theory behind how we're treating. And if we want to treat in a different way, we sort of need to substantiate it in some scientific manner, and that just takes some time.
So maybe,
Something I really tried to get going earlier on in my research career was looking into some type of taking it to the extreme spatial temporal planning. Like, you want normal tissue to get an infinitesimally small dose spread out over many, many fractions, and tumors to get one big block all at once. And so if you were to not have the assumption that the treatment has to be the same every single fraction, how does that look? There are certain functions for trying to quantify dose over time, but from whenever I talk with people who are more intimate with the physics of it, they're kind of like, yeah, but those don't really work. It was kind of like the follow-up. So I was like, okay, well, what if we were to push it to the extremes and plan just based on trying to get those high doses and low on the outside? But it never really picked up traction talking with clinicians to be like, oh, you mean I'd have to develop more plans
Yeah, exactly.
for a patient or something like that?
Yeah.
Versus looking at, I'd almost got it there, presenting it as, oh, what if we were to take a plan and then shift that plan over multiple fractions to be different, but it sums up to the same original plan. And that was kind of like bought into a little bit, but never really got the like green light to, oh yeah, use your time to do that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if maybe that sort of like points to a direction that if we can establish workflows, protocols, whatever to do, you know, and people can really accept sort of an automated planning based on just replicating what we do today. Once we get that going, you're in a better, because that way you presumably don't have to, if the plan's automatically generated, maybe it's automatically QA'd or virtually QA'd or something like that, or not QA'd. Then we can move to, and then if you add to it that different centers are going to be doing something differently, and then you add to the final piece of this national registry, right, which we should have, international registry, which we should have. People talk about this all the time, but again, the momentum to the barriers to getting such a thing off to happen is so insurmountable, in my opinion, that it makes me not even want to work on it. I often tell people the single best thing I could and potentially should do for this field or in this field is simply work on that. You know,
well, you know, David, you said, that you were interested in policy, you know, so is that something that, I'm speaking out of turn because I have no idea how this happens, but is that something that needs to be in some way mandatory from, you know, like a national level or an international level, or how would that even work?
I think a national level policy, top down policy, national level. I forget international. That's insane.
It's not happening.
But a national level. I mean, I would love to see unified patient records.
Yeah.
Readable, anonymized. If you know, you have to deal with the anonymization thing. Some people don't want their data public. I think a lot of people might be like, you know what, that's fine. You know, I mean, a fair number of people would be like, oh, I actually want my patient record to be, you know, and there are moves by private entities to do this. Apple has Apple Health and Apple Research or whatever it's called, but if it doesn't really come from a sort of top down. And of course, single payer healthcare would help with this whole thing too.
Yeah, if you could tie it to reimbursement somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but if it doesn't come from that, it's going to be micromanaged by different entities and different, and it's just going to be what we have today, which is you know,
the motivations of the people who hold the data might not be that clear.
Right. I mean, even within a hospital, it can be very difficult to get data. I mean, people are like, well, can't you just get the data and solve that problem? I'm like, I can't even get it in my own hospital. You know, because physician X doesn't want to give the data away because that's physician X's career. And that's nuts, right? So, and I also think about it as like, I think patients owning their data, and then patients should obviously be allowed to have full access to all their data. And they pretty much do. I mean, it's not that easy to get it, but occasionally patients ask for a CT scanner and whatever. You get here's the CD, here's the CD here. So,
haven't seen one of those since '95. Yeah.
I mean, assuming patients could do it, you could have it done from a patient population or a crowdsourced perspective, where the patients all own their own data, and then they can put that into some cloud. That would be I guess a potentially doable way to do it also. But then the patient's data store, what their data set looks like, has to be, again, some kind of standards.
Yeah, for like clinicians today, if they want to prepare for this type of a future where there is some type of standard data set, what should they be doing right now? Like, even just like naming things and deleting bad contours before saving it and things like that, I feel like would be immensely helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And also, I don't know, maybe clinicians could take their firm opinions and re-examine them. You know, is this protocol-based plan or this automatically optimized plan, is it really, do I really think it's going to be different than my kind of like, well, this is the way I like to do it? Mm-hmm. Really kind of re-examine those biases that creep into all people and all clinicians. I there's stories of, you know, clinicians treating patients differently this week than next week because they just had an incident with a radiation toxicity incident. So now all of a sudden they're but that type of like, oh, that happened 2 weeks ago, so I'm going to change the way I plan today. It's a little crazy, and it should be more data driven than that, you know.
Have you ever proposed the idea of putting error bars on like final dose calculation stuff? You know, there's shift uncertainty, but every time I ever bring up like, oh, let's present people with the uncertainty, it's usually met with a lot of like, well, hold your horses now. We don't want to do that.
Jan Unkelbach, back in the day when Jan Unkelbach and I were, you know, sitting next to each other for many years in a row at MGH, we used to joke about, like, only half joke about writing a paper that kind of tallied up all the uncertainties, not only set up and, you know, but uncertainties in the TCP, uncertainties in NTCP, in dose calculation, in patient motion. Put all these in, and once you have all those, every reasonable treatment plan is exactly equal to every other reasonable treatment plan. Right? There is absolutely no difference between these plans if you factor in all these uncertainties.
Yeah,
and
so
that probably would have been a pretty cool paper if we wrote that. And,
I would have loved that paper because you know, you see people who have like a bound of 4,500 on some structure, and 4,499 and 4,501 are two completely different things.
Yeah, it drives me nuts. It drives
well,
me
and
totally.
it pushes the optimizer quite hard, and a lot of times you get a suboptimal plan, you know, that has a high duty cycle or whatever, you know, because people are really pushing on these things to get even tighter on a certain tolerance.
And they're pushing on them with DVH optimization and.
And it's a cultural thing. I mean, these people staring at these DVHs and dose clouds on their computer and knowing that thing is going to be screenshotted and put into some patient record, and they follow the protocol, everything's good. I mean, it's kind of like, this is crazy, everybody. This is totally nuts, but there it is.
Yeah. Well, you know, what other, you know, the departments that we work in, radiation therapy is very complex, and there's a number of different problems that probably could be solved. So, you know, aside from like something that could really, I don't know, maybe machine learning could apply to other like departmental type things, but what other problems do you think are kind of low hanging fruit from a radiation oncology department perspective? Not like treatment planning, for example, or optimization of you know, dose calculation algorithms, but maybe just like operations, you know, solving problems there. I mean, I think that maybe your experience in this could kind of broaden to hit the whole like hospital scope, but really just radiation oncology for this question.
Yeah. Well, we've already touched on a couple of them. I think patient scheduling is well, I think examining the workflow and your LINAC load, especially in light of what I was saying about 2 gray versus 3 gray. I bring that example up a lot because when I talk about this stuff, just because it's 2 gray to 3 gray is sure, it's like 50% more dose, but that can have a huge impact on, you know, a patient needing to come in for 6 weeks versus, you know, 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It can have a huge impact on the effective usage of an expensive machine. You know, I don't know that that's low hanging. It sort of seems like low hanging fruit, except for the fact that it's policy, and this is not the way we do it. I think some low hanging fruits are. I mean, I'm going to say that auto contouring and auto planning are relatively low hanging fruits. Many vendors have solutions out there, you know, and I think that many of these solutions are probably pretty darn good.
Yeah. So the biggest problem is just adoption of the tools and softwares that are already existing. Yeah.
I mean, not a low hanging fruit is this whole like clean data storage stuff. That's not a low hanging fruit. That's huge amount of work, but the payoff would be great. But again, that's top down thing. That's not even top down from a hospital perspective, because one hospital, it doesn't really matter that much. What matters is like, and there's some people over in Europe, this Jan Jakob is working on this a lot with the whole. They used to call it Eurocat. I think they call it something else now. But this data, learning from different data sources, but maintaining data privacy. These are good ideas, and they're really working hard on it. And I hope something, I hope more countries adopt it, or all countries adopt something similar, and we will get better at this. It's just sometimes I guess when you're in the game, it feels like it's very slow, but maybe, it is.
I feel like time feels like it's passing very slowly over the last few weeks anyway. So,
Yeah, that's certainly true. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 years ago, it was just March, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Other low hanging fruit. Yeah. I guess those are the main ones there. Yeah. Because the technology's already there. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Troy.
I was going to say the underlying patient database has a lot of things that are time stamped. And if you were to look at it from like a classical industrial engineering standpoint, you'd be like, oh, timestamp processes that are in a workflow. Let's start simulating clinics. Automatically scrape distributions from that and see what would it, if we were to add another machine, or how do we deal with downtime, or what should actual policy be versus, oh, well, let's change the policy every 3 months and see how it plays out in real time.
Yeah. I mean, I did see somebody talk about this recently, and they were sort of tweaking the schedule. It might have been at WIMP, actually.
Yeah, right. I remember that.
Yeah, remember. But then you're talking about like then the question comes up of staff burnout. All of a sudden, you're optimizing the schedule, and maybe the dosimetrists enjoy having a little 5-minute break now and then.
Well, yeah, that's definitely the downside of like having, say, somebody with a business like make money for the clinic mindset at the top, having an engineer make a decision that can push it all the way to the limits.
Right. Yeah, and
building
you
in.
don't want to,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so I I'm not. That to me it's all important to keep those dosimetrists happy, as happy as they can be in a job, and on it, and really being really honestly. I mean, we had a couple of patients. Helen Shee, one of the doctors at MGH, she's an awesome physician, and she's a really hard worker, and she also just thinks outside of the box a lot. And she thought, wouldn't it be great to have a couple of patients come in after their treatments are over and talk to the physics group about their experience? And it was really interesting. Probably one of the most interesting, or one of the biggest takeaways for me was the things that they said in terms of like what could be improved. It was never like, could you make D95 a little bit, hotter on my tumor? It wasn't that. It was like, oh, when you clip in the face mask, the sound of it being clipped in there really made me really anxious every day, pretty much. And they're just like, well, you could just make that, you could just put some softeners in there to make that not such a harsh sound. Mm-hmm. It was, or like, oh, I really enjoyed the warm towel. Wow,
there's a lot of easy ways to make the comfort,
Yeah,
maximize.
and so and one that I also know from a different patient telling me this is just like the kindness of a dosimetrist. That's everything. And if this dosimetrist is stressed out because they're packed in like sardines, the patient's not gonna like that either. Okay, get out of here. A little bit of casualness in that, a little bit of humanity, it probably goes a very long way. It's the only thing the patients remember.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you seem to do a pretty good job keeping your humanity. You've got a lot of really fun hobbies, right? So what do you like to do? Yeah. What's David Kraft like on the weekend? Or are you busy with optimization problems on the weekend, or what do you like to do?
Yeah, no, I generally on the weekend, in terms of work and science, I do like to read a lot of science. I can read, science in fact, I have to work try hard to read novels usually because I like novels and I like fiction in general, but I found myself in this like world of like, wow, biology is complicated, and let me try to learn more of it, and it's a never ending
Yes.
it's a never ending mission. But I like to on that note, I like to observe nature, and now's a good time to go out for walks in springtime. And I just was out walking yesterday and observing a couple of flower buds coming into be tiny little things that are coming in. I'm like, oh, I never noticed that. And it was particularly like everyone knows those the helicopters that come down from the maple things, maple trees. But I was just looking at like the tiniest one emerging from the flower. I was like, wow, I've never stopped to notice that before. So anyhow, foraging for wild edible plants is one of my hobbies. And I guess my other big hobby is playing music. And those things they're good antidotes to a day 9 to 5 life in front of the computer.
Yeah. Are you still able to organize your foraging tours right now, or probably
people have asked me
going out alone?
Yeah, I'm just going out alone. People have asked me to do a virtual one, but I don't want to do that. I mean, that seems a little silly. I'll just wait it out. I've been posting a little bit more on Facebook, like this is what's out there now.
Yeah.
No excuse. Get out there and you'll find these things. At least for Boston people. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get some socially distant foraging tours happening in a couple of months. We'll see. We'll have to see what happens. Nobody knows.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, I try to take time away from the computer on the weekends.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. And yeah. And then so how long have you been playing guitar? Because the video that you sent me was pretty amazing. Maybe we'll link to that. I don't know. It depends on what you want, but maybe we'll link to that. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. How long have you been doing that?
Yeah, well, just to give the people who are listening some context, if they don't click on it, big folk hero John Prine died a couple of weeks ago, and I saw John Prine a few times in the last couple of years, and it was pretty cool to see this guy who actually he had head and neck cancer. He got treated. He recovered. You could kind of tell by looking at his face that he kind of got a little bit mangled, but he got right back out there and wrote another couple albums, a bunch of albums after that. Great song. And then he died recently of COVID complications. And he was this guy who could really put some really good lyrics into a song. And so I as a shout out to him, I recorded this song on Facebook called Long Monday, because it was feeling like a long Monday anyhow. At least Mondays, come, and it was gray weather out. I've been playing guitar since I was in high school. I learned how to play guitar because I was in a high school musical, and I was a cowboy, and the cowboy had this one part where he played the Lonesome Cowboy song, and they told me I didn't have to learn it. The guy in the pit orchestra would play the part, but I was like, well, it's just 2 chords. Because I played the piano, I can learn 2 chords. So that little did I know that would become like I would really enjoy playing the guitar, and so. Yeah.
Well, it was a great tribute. I mean, it was you've got a great voice. I feel like you'd be the perfect guy to have around the campfire. Maybe you could leverage these skills at the tumor boards or whatever you need. If things get a little antsy or things get too anxious, you can just pull out the guitar and
that's a good
chill
idea.
Everything out a little bit.
Yeah, I usually keep the worlds a little bit separate, but maybe it's time to start to combine them a little bit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know every time I see Joe Deasy, we brought up him a big story. Every time I see him, he's like, "You eat any good plants lately?" He's always asking me about the foraging. I think he forgets that I also do medical physics sometimes.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I think we got through a lot of stuff today, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
How do you feel, David? Is there a question we should have asked you but didn't?
Oh man.
Like, what's your favorite yoga pose? I know you're into yoga.
Yeah, favorite yoga pose. Oh, what's my probably just like, what I really like to do is just when a yoga teacher told me this once, she was like, the first pose you should do is just when you wake up in the morning, just stand there and just forward fold, just bend over and let your body hang. It just really stretches out your back.
So satisfying.
Yeah, so it's a pretty simple pose. It's called the forward fold. I don't know what the fancy name is for it,
I
but
mean, either.
that's a pretty nice. You just sort of hang there for a minute or two and really loosens things up. So yeah.
Well, I've got another really kind of random question, but you wrote this book, Some of Infinity, and you had a piece in there about the Rubik's Cube. Are you still a master of the Rubik's Cube?
Where's my Rubiks Cube? Oh, here it is. A master, I don't know about that. I can still solve it, unless I've had too many drinks, and then it's interesting to watch my brain, my neural networks, which I guess at that point the connections are a little different. And it's funny to watch, like myself, when I can't solve it. I'm like, and then I pick it up the next day, just solve it right away.
Do you use solve the base, sides, cross, corners, or one of those like adaptive methods?
I use one of those sort of algorithms. It's like one face, and then it's the opposite face, and then it's kind of a neat one. I was thinking about a neural network for the cube for a while. I worked on it for a bit, but I found it very difficult to find a natural way to get the symmetries sort of understood by that, because this cube right here in my hand, if I swapped all the yellows for oranges and all the oranges for greens, it's the same cube. It's like, right. Or if I shuffle two cubes with the R, L, U, U, B, whatever, and do that, but the cubes are oriented in my hand differently to start with, it's the same cube, but the neural network doesn't know that. So I just struggled with getting the symmetries in effectively, and I gave up on it. It's also interesting, though, because it's a combinatorial optimization problem, and neural networks are not known to be good at those. And yet it's probably likely that there is a really good architecture for a neural network to really understand the cube. I just haven't seen it out there. I've seen a couple of papers, but
you've got your eye on it.
And do
I had my eye and thoughts on it for a little while, but I haven't thought much about it lately.
And do you have a quarantine cocktail recipe? A go-to?
Whiskey.
With
whiskey
a little bit
in a glass,
muddled in it. Yeah,
that's where I started, and then I was like, I'm going through whiskey too quickly, so I'll make like a Boulevardier or whatever, the whiskey version of a Negroni.
Okay.
Oh,
nice. Yeah, I actually made a whiskey version of the Rusty Nail the other day, which was pretty good. So that's whiskey and a splash of Drambuie.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. But red wine, whiskey. I don't get too complicated with my drinks.
My wife and I went through a phase recently. We were just like, we're just gonna eat really protein heavy, so we made more shaken egg cocktails to get a little bit of that extra protein.
Oh yeah,
in,
right. A little fizz.
Oh yeah,
like a flip or an egg white sour.
Tom and Jerry or something like that. Yeah.
I really like the ones that are just it's basically eggnog without the cream. So.
Oh my God! Yeah.
You just dry shake that, and I lower the sugar by a decent amount because it's pretty sweet normally, and yeah.
What's that one called?
I've just been calling it a flip.
Okay.
Like the flip is kind of a very broad term, so I'm just like, I just have like we found some brandy here the other day, so it's a brandy flip. And we have a herb garden outside, so I'll put some like rosemary or something like that in there, and a little nutmeg on the top, and.
Yeah,
it's quite nice.
I made a Forsythia simple syrup the other day. Forsythia, I don't know if
they have them in Arkansas.
Yeah, it's out right now around here. It's a yellow flower that comes out early spring. It's a little bit bitter, but you can make a simple syrup with it. It's kind of fun and yellow. I haven't used it in a cocktail. Maybe tonight I'll use it in a cocktail since we're talking.
Inspired. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I can be like, well, I'm drinking tonight because it came up on the podcast.
Exactly.
That's right. The Radformation people forced me into it.
Yeah.
No, it'll be good when we can finally get together and have a drink together and do a collective cheers. I know we're all probably ready for that. But
yeah, definitely.
In the meantime, I'm happy that you were able to and agreeable to doing this video chat. It was good to connect with you again, David, after shredding the slopes at WIP, and it was fun chatting with you there. So I'm glad that we kind of connected here, and I really enjoyed the chat.
I did too.
Yeah,
nice to chat with both of you guys and see you guys.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, David. Take care, man.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
Bye.